exists is interesting, and I want to understand its cause. Me the fuck too, dude. Me too. I really want to understand people. Like, that's why I'm a therapist, guys. This is why I do what I do. Um, and I'm understanding that it's like things happen to people. It messes with their brains, and that's a huge part of it.
Hey,
What's up?
I was just curious, is this like common for your audience to say like I find the reasons hate exists interesting? Like, is that really like the most interesting thing they can think of saying?
Like, are you a person who's fascinated by like human psychology and behavior?
I mean, yeah, but like finding the reason why hate exists. I mean, yeah, it's just an emotion.
Like, maybe like more structural versions of it. Like, obviously, the reasons why, like, for example, like, why do we have aversions? Like, even stuff like that is interesting. So it's kind of like studying these general things, why different types of people have these types of feelings for different groups. Like, I don't know, like, sociologists study this stuff. I guess maybe, yeah, look into sociology. That might help, or and like anthropology might help you understand why
Yeah,
people would be interested in this stuff. But yeah, I'm very
yeah,
interested in like human behavior, why people do what they do, why some humans kind of like are more attracted to hate groups than other people, stuff like that. I find very fascinating. I've done a lot of cult research, things like that.
yeah. But I mean, isn't it like super subjective, like depending on every single person and like
Well, yeah, but
because like to
there
know
are
the
typically
cause of hate
themes.
is like
There are often themes that we can kind of gather from the research. Yes, but yes, even in that, everyone is going to have unique experiences. Absolutely.
okay. And to address your background, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about this because I do find this interesting, the
Okay.
transsexual versus transgender kind of self-destructive thing within the LGBT community
Okay.
because they essentially hate each other.
I
Um,
mean, that's okay. So fair. I see that too. I
yeah,
mean, yeah. Yeah, and
yeah.
are you a member of the LGBTQ community, or just like a like just
No,
watching
not
it?
at all. I just find
Okay.
it. I find the whole thing like this whole transsexual transgender thing interesting because it's pretty flimsy arguments and it's all based off social constructs and everything. It's not really people speak as if it's some sort of objective truth, but I mean it depends on what society you're in, the social norms within that society. There's so many subjective matters to it that
Well,
I
there
just
definitely are a
think
lot
it's
of
hilarious.
subjective matters that come with it, but also like it like gender is also biologically like you know like you know determined by our brains and stuff. So
Yeah, like yes and no. I mean like
what do you
so
mean
when you
yes
say
and no?
determined, yeah, like but when you say determined by our brains, like the only things I've been really told is that, there's some similarities with someone that's like, let's say a trans woman with like a cis woman. Um, I mean, don't you start to get into this argument of like correlation isn't causation, and um, pretty sure like men that are like considered, attracted to the same gender or whatever,
Hmm.
they would carry those similarities as well. So we're kind of just playing a game of like guess what. I mean, like, there's nothing objectively like, for example, what I always ask people is like, let's say we do all the tests and all the tests result in like this massive similarity of to a cis woman, but the person doesn't identify as trans. The person doesn't feel like they're trans. Are they still trans? They just don't know it yet.
That's an interesting idea. Like, because what we would say is like, okay, so the brain structure is what is causing the gender dysphoria in the first place, or the kind of differences in brain structure versus like bodily sex are causing the dissonance.
Yeah.
So, like, it would be, I think that it might be odd if a person just like had this brain difference and it didn't impact their behavior at all. Like, that would be strange.
Yeah, I guess the thing that I'm mostly addressing is like when people objectively say like trans women are women. I find that statement kind of hilarious because I always ask them, "Are you saying that subjectively or objectively?" Because I mean, the term "woman" is not an objective
That's
term at
actually a really
all.
good point. Yeah, and I would say that like yeah, probably would be pretty subjective generally. Um, and I feel like, and for me, I think that it's like a utility thing. Like it's useful, and can get confusing. Like, do you know who Blair White is?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like someone was talking about her and like calling her a he, and I just got so confused. I'm like, who are you talking about? Like when you do that type of stuff, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, clearly she's a woman. Like, she's a man. Like, come on. Like things like that. I'm
Yeah, I
like,
mean,
clearly she
but
is
that's when you
like
get into
very
the
much like doing the woman thing, and naturally people are going to call her a woman. So just like we have these people who are categorized as women in our society. Yes, some of them are born male, but yeah, the majority of women
yeah,
are
but
going
I
to
feel
be
like
female.
your reaction to the Blair White thing kind of goes into like the whole argument that transsexuals make, where you know, if you go through the effort of mocking characteristics and phenotypes and stereotypes, eventually you can come off socially as what you're trying to come off as.
Why do
But
you
I mean,
say
there's plenty of
mocking
people
out
out
of
there.
curiosity?
Yeah. Why do I say mocking? Because I tend to notice it's very stereotypical. Another example I would use, right? It happens in the GAY community where, let's say, a GAY white male will actually carry the stereotypes and characteristics of a black woman, which
For
is
sure.
hilarious.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, so it's insanely stereotypical. Putting on makeup, all these things, it actually kind of
So like
pigeonholes
is like a
people.
woman. So like when, for example, when like a man like wants to feel confident in himself and he like does like something super manly or like drinks a beer or whatever, like is he mocking out of curiosity? Is he mocking maleness by doing that?
No, not at all. But if it like, all right, so my great example would be like if I met a guy. They obviously there's guys that you can tell are mocking. Let's go to the stereotype of the Kyle that drinks Monster, and like that typical varsity like over exaggerated persona. There's plenty of men that I've met that are actually, yes, like they are creating a persona of manhood that is
Okay.
so exaggerated to the extent that it's obvious.
Okay. And I think that's like I think that for example, like would you say that like a tomboy, like a girl who just is kind of boyish, is she mocking men? Or only is it trans?
Tomboy.
Yeah, like a tomboy, like just a girl
It
who
depends.
like
Like I would say a butch would definitely be mocking, but a tomboy is
that's
pretty
so
flexible because
interesting.
they
So like what's
yeah.
the
I
difference?
mean, it
Like so
depends.
what distinct like so for like what distinguishes a tomboy from a butch individual in your opinion?
Oh, yeah. I mean, tomboys tend to just naturally enjoy certain things, whereas when it comes to like a butch, it almost seems like somebody gave them a costume and was like this, like gave them a costume, made them watch Spike TV for like 30 days, and they were like, all right, now try to be a man. Like it's pretty obvious when you do see it.
That's
It's almost like you're creating a
bizarre.
character.
That's really
I mean,
bizarre.
not at all.
I got that's so it's bizarre to me because like people I don't know, like I don't like and the idea of I guess perhaps I'm sensitive to the word mocking because it seems like the mocking kind of communicates a point of like jest, joking, intentionally creating an image like a hilarious image
No,
to
mocking
offend
isn't
of some
just
type
time
of thing.
trying your best to replicate something that you think is. So like
Okay. So
um
like a mock
yeah,
up
I mean,
or like a
and
mock
someone even said, and just to be clear,
thing.
someone even said, so cis people can do it, but we can't. No, I mean the people that do that create a very exaggerated persona. Like think about those, very weak men that work a like minimum wage job that call themselves alpha male because they watch too much Andrew Tate. We make fun of them because
Okay.
you're creating a character. Right? You're creating this stereotypical persona that you're. Maybe it's from their insecurities or whatever it is, where they're trying to create this facade that they're bigger than they are. But yeah, we make fun of those people regardless of cis or trans. But yeah,
Okay, but I guess the difference is that you would say that it only some cis people do this mocking, but every trans person does the mocking, like every
no,
trans person. Then I
not at
don't get
all.
it.
No,
Then
because there is a huge disagreement within the trans community of what they consider themselves and all this stuff. So like there's people out there that will like not go into the hardcore like trying to be almost look coming off like they're like the next Barbie girl. They just they
okay,
identify that way. They might just have like some longer hair, but they're not going to the full extent where they're like almost creating a stereotypical persona. And that's like you'll see disagreements within the trans community of you know the people that think that everybody should be passing in order to be what they are. The people
okay.
that Yeah. So I mean, it's obviously there's so many people within the community that have disagreements of what is, the right way to transition.
I mean, for sure. But in that, like, would it be that like yeah, it's interesting that you would kind of say like, so for example, in my head, everyone is coached to perform gender. Every human being, especially in America, we are coached to perform gender. Little boys do this, little girls do that. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree, and I feel like the trans movement has completely reinforced that. Yeah.
What do you mean?
It's completely reinforced it. I mean, like the way where I mean, one of the tips that people get about early signs that your kid might be displaying trans behavior is just stereotypical activities that children would perform. So like, oh, is your son, more accustomed to sparkly things, Barbie dolls? These are signs where, you might actually have someone that doesn't identify with the gender that they were born as.
I feel like
Obviously it's not
like
what?
that would be like people would be so woefully uneducated if they thought that.
No. It's signs, but it's not like, oh, your kid's definitely trans. But like people definitely use
Right.
that as some sort of social marker.
So for example,
I mean, I've even had someone that supposedly, they have a trans kid. I say supposedly because until after puberty, usually that's when they either will be, fully go into that, or they, what's it called, desist. After puberty is when you really know if someone is that.
okay.
Because especially if you look at the desisting rates of children with gender dysphoria, after puberty, it's like around 12 or 13 years old, they start to move away from that, and they're I think it's like 90 something percent.
12% of them stop.
No,
Is that what you're saying?
12 to 13 years old, it's around 90% desist from because it's the complicated thing when you're using younger people. When it comes to, you don't want to use detransitioning rates, you want to use desisting rates, because if you use detransit, they don't actually perform transitioning at that age. So you have to look into desisting rates.
Are you pulling from the, because I know there was a study that like had that 90% number, but it was about like youth that was like that were like gender non-conforming youth or something like that. Like
Yeah.
that, I remember there being a study where it was like gender non-conforming youth, but like not all of them.
I believe it
ended up
was
being
probably that.
transitioning.
Yeah.
So that's normal, like to be expected, because like a gay kid, like a young gay person might, like a gay man might like play with dolls or wear dresses or something like that. That, like, that would have been considered like someone like they're having gender dysphoria or something like that, but we don't see it that way anymore. Like we have improved in our kind of understanding
Yeah, but
of what's going on.
if the rate's already that high in that example, if the rate's already that high for around 90-something percent, now
You
it
understand
would
that
be
they're
safe
not
to say you
trans,
don't know.
but those are not trans kids who are insisting that they are the opposite gender, persisting and insisting. I am the opposite gender. That's very different from I want to play with dolls. That's the difference.
Okay, so if a child under the age of 12 is insisting that they are trans, do you say that they are 100% trans? There's not going to be a change or development?
No, not at all. I would say that this kid is like currently presenting with these symptoms. I can't say anything about their future.
Yeah, currently, but that's what I was saying initially. Like that's what I was getting to, where like I can't sit here and say like their kid is 100% trans, because like they are at an age where we're not really going to know if they are or aren't.
So like
They're still trying to figure that out themselves.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, but yeah, I was talking to someone that had that, and that's what they used as social markers, where they were like, he's like, I didn't really identify the kid with what gender they were to be, like let them figure it out on their own. And they said as they were watching their kid grow up, it was the stereotypes of like, oh, my kid's playing with monster trucks now, and like my kid's like, my kid's doing this and my kid's doing that, and all these very stereotypical things. And he goes, he's like, now I'm at a point where I started to consider maybe the kid, is going towards this gender. And I'm like, to me, it's kind of mind-boggling how it all operates, especially with younger people. It just doesn't necessarily make any sense to me. And now you got kids going around saying they're Atharian, that they believe they're foxes and everything, which is crazy to me. So I'm like, do we really have to sit here and trust every impression that a child has about what they are until like maybe they're 16 or 18 years old when they actually know what's going on?
Okay. I think, and I definitely understand like concerns that individuals have around like respecting identity of children, because children can be like, I'm a fairy or something, like, or a Therian, which is definitely a thing that's like happening nowadays. But I also think that we can understand that we treat different conditions differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like so we're gonna treat kids who are presenting with gender dysphoria differently than we're gonna treat someone who like thinks that they're an animal, like very different.
No, 100%. I'm just saying that like
different, yeah, situations.
I'm just like kind of pointing out like the fragileness of like a kid's mind, where like you can kind of sway them into certain directions if you don't treat it properly, where you don't really raise them in a way that's the most beneficial, I guess, for their understanding of their life. That's kind of what I'm getting at with that. Like if a kid thinks that they're a legit fox, which is real, it's kind of crazy. Like if those people exist, who's to say that this other stuff isn't potentially harmful and can cause issues down the road?
That is a great question, and like definitely has been like looked into and understood. And like I don't, for example, know what current treatments are for other types of things, like like believing you're some type of other creature, or if that is being treated.
Yeah, I don't even think there is a treatment
right
for
now.
That. Like, I don't even think so.
But like, yeah, I think we understand that for example, in the difference between like someone who like believes that they're fat when they're not fat, like we're gonna treat them differently than someone who's like believes that they're a male, like because they're experiencing gender dysphoria or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they should be treated differently. And I think that, for example, like that cases with kids should be, I think that there should just be a lot of, like especially for like the medical stuff, like definitely having a lot of therapy and all that stuff to make sure that like the kid is like going on a right path, and they can know like all of the things that they're kind of signing up for if they start doing anything that's like medical when they're like 16 or something like that.
Yeah.
But I also think that in the idea of being like, we can't do this to any kids because what if they regret it? Like I understand that that's definitely like a fear or concern, but I think for example the desisting rates of transgender people overall, I think is generally pretty low. Like even for like adults who detransition or whatever, they're generally pretty low. I've heard anywhere from like 1 to 7% or something like that.
But you would agree that. Okay, so this is where I get a little kind of, I'm like, people will bring up like, oh, well, they're generally pretty low. The whole, I call it hyper progressivism, where it's like this, people are trying so hard to be accepting to the point it's going to be self-destructive. I understand that there's people that genuinely feel like they're in the wrong body, and, more power to them. But like the problem I have is, we don't really know what the cause and harm, like what the harms are truly going to be until like 80 years down the road, where we could actually look at like a good amount of people that have gone through this that are youth. Like the whole youth thing when it comes to this topic, it's relatively new. And when we're talking about medical intervention and stuff like that, it is very new. So like to say that we know that it's really low and all this stuff, it's a bit disingenuous. We don't have a large scale of being able to like really quantify how harmful it is.
Well, I would say like Jenny just mentioned, like transition has been going on for a really long time generally. So we know a lot about people who transition. For example, like, and what you're saying is I think that it's been maybe like within the past 20 years, maybe less than 20 years, that we've been seeing like medicalization of like youth, or like kind of like gender, like puberty blockers type of a thing or whatever. Yes. And I would definitely say that there are like definitely like exploratory, what is that, like off-label uses for the medication that we're doing. But I think when you look at like, this is something that also happens in the medical field a lot. And I'm not saying that this isn't something to like not have any seriousness about. And that's why I do think that like it's important to take these things seriously. Like if you're going to do like take medical steps, like take this very, very, very extremely seriously.
There's obviously the reason why I get concerned is, and it's obviously rare cases. It's people that are pretty far to the point where their political ideologies and everything become their personality. And there is parents out there that have, like, let's say 3 trans kids at the same time. That's like a statistical anomaly. Like, for that to even occur is actually one of the most unlikely things in the world. Like, if you were to actually run the rates of, like, odds. So, like, when I start to see that developing, especially the more I'm going to be honest, the more this thing becomes like a bandwagon, which, I mean, it has become a very trending topic. And if people don't acknowledge that, I feel like they're just not being a bit realistic about the situation. Yeah, I mean, if you're seeing one parent with 3 trans kids, that's one trans kid. Yeah, that makes sense. But 3, I'm like, can we just call it what it is? That's concerning.
And I guess, like, sometimes I think about this stuff and then I'm like, okay, I think that in the sense that the similarities between, like, being gay and trans are, they're not a ton, but I think in terms of, like, having like, I would not be surprised if someone said something similar like that about, like, a parent who had several gay kids, like, 50 years ago. And that being, like, a strange thing.
I'd agree, and, like, I just can't really agree with the comparison, right? Because it's like there's a lot more external factors, I guess, when it comes to, like, what you're attracted to. It would be very unlikely, 100%. And I don't think that really ever happens. So, like, even in that case, yeah, it would be. It would be.
It definitely
Sorry?
does. It definitely does.
Yeah, I'm sure, like, once in a blue moon, but, like, yeah, the odds of having 3 kids that are all, yeah, I mean, that's just doesn't really make much sense. But, like sure, you can find one out of the bucket.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, it can be more common depending on, like, there's a lot of things that can make these things more common. Like, people who are autistic are more likely to be, like, to have differences in their sexuality or gender experience. And if like 2 parents who are autistic get married and they have a bunch of autistic kids, there's a high chance of several of them having gender or sexuality variances. So
Yeah.
to say that if it happens, it's like something shady. Maybe I understand the concern, and at the same time, I'm like, I think sometimes we can maybe over police people's lives in a sense.
Yeah, but I feel like, if it's that amount of kids all in the same home, yeah, I mean, that would put up a bit of a yellow flag, not like a red flag, because, like, yeah, I mean, I would definitely look into it, because there is evidence and signs of, and I'm not saying this is how someone becomes this way, but the people that end up liking the same gender and stuff like that, there is signs of certain people falling into that category because of related trauma to their upbringing, which is not inherent, but, like, yeah, it's not inherent. It's not what makes somebody GAY. But, like, if you start to get that many people under the same roof, all having that characteristic, I'm going to be like, all right, I hope that they came to that conclusion on their own. But, like,
okay,
with this amount of rates, it's starting to make me a little concerned that something is going a bit beyond that.
And, like, do you think that, like, for example, like, is your concern that, like, the parents are, like, transing the kids? Like, what is your concern really? Like, if there are 3 kids who are trans, like, what is the concern?
Yeah, so I mean, for the example that I brought up, for the 3 trans kids, it's a mother. I don't remember her name, but I remember getting the story. She, like, posts videos about it and stuff like that. But she's super politically active.
Okay.
So with all of that connecting, I would say it's safe to kind of make an assumption that there is some sort of parental influence involved in that, because if your identity is a very, very, like, hardcore progressive, politically active, LGBT active, and then you end up getting a statistical anomaly of 3 trans kids, would you not consider that concerning?
I guess, like,
because kids are impressionable.
Like, and I know, like, I don't know if this is annoying to say, but then, like, what about, like, hyper conservative religious parents, and then all of their kids end up straight?
Yeah, both are bad.
Cis? Like, is that questionable?
No.
Like, to see a family
No,
that's all straight kids,
it's,
is that questionable too?
No. So
Okay.
if someone is being all right, so if someone is being the reason why is because of the statistics, right? So like people being cis and straight is a lot more likely. So it's
Okay.
kind of hard to make that assumption. But if they are hardcore conservative and stuff like that, and then you end up learning that, let's say like a kid expressed some sort of attraction or something like that, and it got completely like nerfed and pushed out of the way. That would be considered definitely a red flag and concerning. I think parents influencing their kids to that degree, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, is not healthy. It's just harder to detect when it comes to like, oh, all of these kids are straight, because it's like, well, I mean, there's a high likelihood for that to occur.
Okay. Okay, so just like it's higher, okay, higher likelihood generally. And then here's another
Yes.
question that I'm just curious, like, is is being trans or being gay like a negative thing generally?
No,
Okay. Why not?
not at all. I mean, whatever makes you feel better. Like I don't like whatever you want to do. I don't really care. I just think it gets a little iffy when you start to talk about very impressionable young people that are still developing their brain.
Okay. So kind of like, so maybe you'd be the type of person who's like, you like not don't teach kids about trans because it might influence them to be trans or something.
Um, I think when they start to like genuinely express it, you treat it as is. Like, but I think the what I get concerned about is generally teaching kids. Um, like it's the same thing like when you're teaching kids about like let's say the birds and the bees, right?
Okay.
Like okay, let's say I was worried about my kid getting into a situation with like an older person, so you'd explain it in a certain way, right? Where you're like no parts and all this stuff. Detail, I guess, matters, and I think that I get concerned when people are teaching this topic what the details they're going to provide are.
And that actually I think is fair. That is actually fair. That's probably the fairest point I've heard anyone make. Because I think that that's the difference. It's like, how much do you say? Like, I think talking about it is fine, but if you say too much, I think that's inappropriate. I think there is a
And then to give you like really
appropriate.
quick, to give you like background of where I got to this point, right?
Okay.
I have friends that are part of the LGBT community, and there's one girl that I do think about every time I talk about this. There was a couple of people that were really close to her that were transitioning, and she has her own, developmental problem, not developmental, but her own hindrances on her, mental well-being.
Okay.
And she was about to hop on, she was like about a week away from taking hormones, and all this stuff. And she had to sit down with me and my girlfriend where she was explaining to us that she notices that everyone around her that is doing this is happy, and she doesn't feel right within her own body and all this stuff. She has a lot of trauma and stuff that happened when she was younger. And she was about to do it. And then my advice to her was, you're still young. This is something that like you haven't tried what you already have. Like you haven't tried to like embrace your femininity and go out there and like try to really be someone that you might want to be. And I was like, you give it a year. I was like, just try that before you go down this road of like